Snow fell in thick curtains across the underground garage, cold air seeping through the concrete levels of the Lancaster Tower. Victoria Lancaster stood perfectly still in her Armani blazer black wool tailored to mathematical precision, her Louboutin heels clicking once against the polished floor as she shifted her weight. The CEO of Lancaster Security Group, $650 million in annual revenue. 400 employees across 12 states did not wait. Not for traffic, not for board meetings, not for maintenance contractors who couldn't fix a heating system on schedule. Marcus Cole knelt beside the industrial HVAC unit, his work uniform stained with oil that wouldn't wash out, no matter how many times he ran it through the laundromat on Atlantic Avenue. His hands, calloused from years of night shifts, worked methodically through the tangle of copper pipes and electrical conduits. 36 years old, but the lines around his eyes told a different story. One carved by sleepless nights and the weight of raising a 7-year-old daughter alone. Victoria's voice cut through the hum of distant traffic. My company pays $250 an hour for emergency service. I don't want to watch you kneel there anymore. Fix it in 10 minutes or your employer gets blacklisted from every property Lancaster Security manages. Marcus didn't look up. His fingers traced a hairline crack in the pressure valve, the kind of damage that happened when someone rushed a repair job instead of doing it right. He stood slowly wiping his hands on a rag that was already more grease than cloth and met her eyes for the first time. The words came out quiet, but they carried. You can buy my hours, ma'am, but you can't buy the skill. This system needs 30 minutes minimum. You can wait or you can freeze in your 20th floor corner office. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those green eyes. 10 years running her father's company, building it from regional security firm to national powerhouse. And nobody spoke to her like that. Not the board members who resented a woman in the CEO chair. Not the clients who tried to negotiate her rates down. Certainly not a maintenance worker in a stained uniform who smelled like industrial solvent and cheap soap. 2 weeks from now, this man will step between me and a bullet. And I'll realize I love him. The thought arrived fully formed, a certainty that made no logical sense. Victoria pushed it down, the way she pushed down everything that threatened her carefully constructed control. She turned on her heel without another word, the click of her shoes echoing as she walked toward the elevator bank. Marcus watched her go, then returned to the broken heating unit. His hands moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd been fixing things since he was old enough to hold a wrench. His father, a steelworker in Pittsburgh, had taught him that a job worth doing was worth doing right. The old man was 10 years gone now, heart attack at 52, but his lessons remained. The valve would need replacing, not just patching. Marcus pulled out his phone screen, cracked in 2 places, held together with electrical tape, and texted his supervisor. 30 minutes became 45 by the time he had the new part installed and tested. The heat kicked on with a low rumble that echoed through the garage levels. Victoria never came back to check. She was already in her Mercedes S-Class heading north on the FDR Drive toward a merger meeting that would add another $70 million to Lancaster Security's portfolio. But she thought about the maintenance worker twice during the drive, which was twice more than she'd thought about any man in the past 6 months. Marcus finished his shift at 5 in the morning, his back aching from the crawl spaces and ductwork. He drove his 15-year-old Honda Civic through the pre-dawn streets of Brooklyn past the closed storefronts and early morning delivery trucks. The apartment was in Crown Heights, a walk-up building where the landlord fixed nothing and the neighbors kept to themselves. 2 bedrooms for $900 a month. The furniture sagged with age, but Marcus kept it arranged with military precision. Lily's homework papers covered the kitchen table in neat stacks, math worksheets, with gold stars spelling tests with excellent written in purple marker. A single photo frame sat on the bookshelf, positioned so you couldn't see it straight on from the doorway. Marcus never looked at that photo anymore. His wife smiled out from the frame, forever 28, forever 3 years dead. The police report said brake failure. Marcus knew better. He'd checked the maintenance records himself, confirmed the mechanic had inspected those brake lines 2 weeks before the accident. Someone had cut them. Someone who wanted to send a message or eliminate a witness or make sure certain questions stopped being asked. He'd buried Rachel on a Tuesday. Lily had been 4 years old, too young to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. 7-year-old Lily still asked sometimes, usually at bedtime when the dark made everything feel more possible. The apartment was quiet now. Lily was spending the night at Margaret Wilson's place 2 doors down. Mrs. Wilson was 62, widowed, lonely enough that watching Lily overnight felt like a blessing instead of a burden. Marcus paid her $40 each time, money he couldn't really spare but wouldn't dream of refusing to give. He showered the water pressure barely above a trickle and fell into bed for 3 hours of sleep before he'd need to pick Lily up for school. The dreams came the way they always did. Rachel's car crumpled against the highway divider. Metal twisted into shapes that metal shouldn't make, the smell of gasoline and burned rubber. In the dreams, he was always running toward the wreckage but never getting closer, his legs moving through air thick as concrete. He woke at 8:30 to his phone alarm, the sound like an ice pick through his skull. Coffee from the pot he'd set up the night before reheated in a microwave that sparked when it ran too long. He picked up Lily at Mrs. Wilson's, his daughter, bouncing with the energy of someone who'd gotten a full night's sleep and didn't carry the weight of everything that could go wrong. Lily wore her favorite rainbow backpack, the one she'd begged for at Target, until Marcus finally broke down and spent the $30. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail that Mrs. Wilson had done better than Marcus ever could. She talked the entire drive to PS 316. Her voice bright with stories about the sleepover, the cookies they'd baked, the movie about talking animals that Mrs. Wilson had let her stay up late to watch. Marcus smiled and nodded and felt his chest tighten with how much he loved this kid, how much he'd do to keep her safe, how completely he'd failed to protect her mother. He dropped Lily at school and went home to sleep until 2 in the afternoon. The apartment was too quiet without her. He did the dishes that had been sitting in the sink for 3 days, swept the floor, checked the expiration dates on everything in the refrigerator. Normal life. The kind of existence where nobody looked at you twice, where you blended into the background of the city's endless crowds. That was the point. Stay invisible. Stay alive. At 3:15, he picked Lily up from the after-school program, her backpack heavy with library books and art projects. She'd drawn a picture of a family, stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a triangular roof and a yellow sun. 3 figures. Daddy, Lily, and someone else with long hair and a dress. Marcus didn't ask who the third person was supposed to be. Maybe a teacher, maybe a friend's mom, maybe the ghost of the mother she barely remembered. He told Lily the picture was beautiful and taped it to the refrigerator where the magnet collection was too scattered to hold anything properly. They needed groceries. Milk for cereal, the instant ramen that Lily preferred to actual vegetables, the generic granola bars that cost half as much as the name brand. Marcus checked his wallet, $43 until Friday's paycheck. Enough for the essentials if he was careful. The drive to Hawthorne Market took 12 minutes through evening traffic. Marcus kept checking the rearview mirror out of habit that had become instinct. The black Chevrolet Impala was 3 cars back, same as it had been yesterday afternoon and the day before that. Different enough from the traffic pattern to notice if you were looking. Obvious enough to be intentional if someone wanted you to know you were being watched. His pulse quickened, but he kept his breathing steady. Lily was singing something from her music class, off-key but enthusiastic. And he wouldn't let her see the fear that lived just beneath his skin every waking moment. The Impala didn't follow them into the market parking lot. It drove past the windows tinted too dark to see the driver and disappeared around the corner toward the residential streets. Marcus sat in his car for 30 seconds, scanning the lot before he decided it was safe enough. Safe enough. Nothing was actually safe. But you made calculations, weighed risks, tried to live a life that didn't make your daughter grow up too fast. Inside Hawthorne Market, the fluorescent lights hummed with that specific frequency that made everything look slightly unreal. Lily grabbed a shopping basket and pulled it toward the snack aisle with both hands, her feet doing a little skip hop that meant she was happy. Marcus followed, watching her select her favorite cup noodles chicken flavor with the cartoon characters on the packaging. Brooke Sullivan was working the register, her red hair pulled back in a ponytail, her name tag crooked. 22 years old and saving money for community college, she'd mentioned once, when Marcus had come in to buy cold medicine for Lily. She smiled when she saw them approaching. Her voice carried that particular cheerfulness of someone working a minimum wage job who'd decided being miserable wasn't worth it. "Hey there, I love your backpack, Lily. Are those rainbows?" Lily beamed and nodded, launching into an explanation of how she'd picked it out herself. And Daddy said it was too expensive, but then he got it for her birthday, even though her birthday wasn't for 2 more weeks. Marcus added a gallon of milk to the basket, a box of granola bars, the instant ramen that would feed them for 3 dinners if he stretched it. $23.40 when Brooke rang it up. He handed her $25 and told her to keep the change, which made Lily's eyes go wide because Daddy never did that. Outside, the December air bit at exposed skin. The parking lot was half empty, the kind of late afternoon where most people were either still at work or already home, starting dinner. Marcus took Lily's hand and headed toward the car keys already in his other hand, the way he'd been trained to do, always ready, always aware of exits and sightlines and potential threats. That's when he saw Garrett Voss standing too close to Helen Crawford. Helen was 67, a retired schoolteacher who volunteered at the library and lived alone since her husband died. She stood by the ATM near the market entrance, her purse clutched in both hands. Her shoulders hunched forward in the universal body language of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. Garrett had positioned himself between Helen and the parking lot, his voice rising with each word. "I'm telling you, the machine ate my card and now it says I withdrew $200 I never got. You were standing right there. You saw what happened. You need to give me what's mine." His appearance screamed respectability, leather jacket that fit well. Hair styled with product that caught the light, the kind of face that women probably found handsome if they didn't look too close at the coldness in his eyes. But Marcus had spent 6 years with Operation Silent Shield, extracting witnesses and assets from situations where regular law enforcement couldn't reach. He knew predators when he saw them, knew the difference between genuine distress and performance art designed to intimidate. Helen's voice came out small and shaking. "I don't have any money to give you. I just came to check my balance." Garrett moved closer, his hand reaching toward her purse. "Then let's see your wallet. Maybe you're lying. Maybe you took my money while I was distracted." Marcus stopped walking. His body went still in that particular way that Rachel used to call his soldier mode, when the man who fixed heating systems disappeared and something older and harder came to the surface. He handed Lily the grocery bag, his voice quiet but firm. "Stay here by the door with Miss Brooke. I'll be right back." Lily's eyes went wide, but she nodded, recognizing something in her father's tone that said this wasn't negotiable. She clutched the bag and moved back toward the market entrance where Brooke had stepped outside for a cigarette break. Marcus walked toward Garrett and Helen with his hands visible, his posture non-threatening but his path deliberate. He positioned himself between them, not touching either one, just creating space with his presence. The words came out level and calm. "That's enough. Police are on their way. You should leave now while you still can." Garrett's expression shifted in the span of a heartbeat. The anger melted into something calculating, his eyes taking in Marcus's stained uniform, the exhaustion carved into his face, the grocery bag visible through the window with a 7-year-old girl holding it. An opportunity presenting itself on a silver platter. Brooke had her phone out, backing toward the entrance. "I already called 911. They said 3 minutes. 3. Garrett turned his attention to her, his voice switching registers to wounded outrage. "This guy is threatening me. I was just trying to get help and he came at me all aggressive." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Nobody's threatening anyone. Just step back and wait for the police to sort it out." But Garrett was already moving his stumble backward, perfectly choreographed, his arm sweeping across the display of energy drinks near the entrance. Cans clattered across the pavement in a cascade of red and silver, bouncing and rolling. Garrett grabbed his own wrist and hissed like he'd been struck, his other hand pressing to his chest. The performance was flawless. His voice carried across the parking lot loud enough for the three people who'd stopped to watch. "This man just attacked me. He threatened me. Look what he did." Garrett pointed at Marcus with theatrical horror. His face twisted into an expression of fear that might have been convincing if Marcus hadn't watched him switch it on like a light. Helen tried to speak up, but Garrett talked over her, his words coming fast. "I was just standing here and he came at me. Somebody get the police." Two people had their phones out now recording, but they'd only started filming after the cans fell. The video would show Marcus standing there while Garrett pointed and shouted. It would show the energy drinks scattered across the pavement. It wouldn't show the 90 seconds before when Garrett had been cornering an elderly woman and demanding money. Marcus took one step forward, trying to calm the situation. "Nobody attacked you. Let's all just wait for—" Garrett grabbed his own wrist and bent it at an angle, his face contorting. "He's still coming at me. Somebody help!" Inside the market, Lily pressed her hands against the window, leaving small prints on the glass. Her face crumpled with confusion and fear, unable to understand why her father was being accused of something she knew he hadn't done. Marcus stopped moving. Every instinct screamed at him to explain, to defend himself, to make these people understand that he'd only been trying to help. But he'd learned the hard way that sometimes the system didn't care about the truth. Sometimes the performance mattered more than the reality underneath. The police car arrived exactly 4 minutes after Brooks' 911 call, sliding into the parking lot with lights flashing, but no siren. Two officers emerged, both male, both with the particular expression of cops who'd responded to 1,000 disturbance calls, and expected this one to be just as routine. The older officer approached Garrett first. "Sir, are you injured?" Garrett had managed to produce a scratch on his forearm, probably from scraping it against the brick wall while Marcus had been talking to Lily. The wound was superficial but bleeding enough to look dramatic in the parking lot lights. "This man attacked me. I was trying to get help from that woman because the ATM malfunctioned, and he just came at me, threatened me, pushed me into those drinks. I don't know if he's on drugs or what, but I was terrified. That little girl there, what if he does something to her?" The concern for Lily was a nice touch, made him sound like a responsible citizen instead of someone running a con. The younger officer approached Marcus, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. "Sir, I need to see your hands." Marcus raised them slowly, keeping his movements telegraphed and clear. "I didn't attack anyone. I was protecting that woman from—" The officer cut him off. "I'll need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." The words stuck in Marcus's throat. "Please, not in front of my daughter. I didn't do anything wrong." But the officer had already made his decision based on the same calculation that everyone always made. The well-dressed man with the bleeding arm looked like a victim, and the tired guy in the work uniform looked like trouble. The optics told a story that had nothing to do with what had actually happened. The younger officer's voice went harder. "Sir, turn around now or we will use force." Marcus looked at Lily through the market window. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as Brooke knelt beside her, trying to offer comfort that couldn't possibly work. He thought about running, about fighting, about all the training that could get him out of this parking lot and away from this situation. But Lily would see it. Lily would remember her father running from police, and maybe they'd catch him anyway, and then what would happen to her? He turned slowly and placed his hands on the cold metal of the police car. The handcuffs clicked into place, the metal biting into his wrists, and something broke open in his chest that had been holding steady for 3 years of living quiet and small and invisible. Lily's scream cut through the glass and the distance and the careful control Marcus had been maintaining. "Daddy, don't hurt my daddy!" She ran outside, her rainbow backpack, bouncing tears streaming down her face. Brooke tried to catch her, but Lily was too fast, too desperate. She threw herself at Marcus, but the younger officer intercepted her, his hands gentle despite the situation. "Sweetie, you need to stay back." Lily fought against the restraint, her whole body shaking. "He didn't do anything bad. Daddy's a good man. He was helping the old lady. Don't take him." Marcus felt the tears on his own face before he realized he was crying. He tried to turn his head to look at his daughter, but the officer's hand on his shoulder kept him facing the car. "It's okay, Lily. It's going to be okay. Miss Brooke is going to take care of you until we sort this out." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. And the look on Lily's face, pure terror mixed with betrayal and confusion, was going to live in Marcus's nightmares for however many days or weeks or months he had left before the people hunting him finally caught up. The older officer conducted a quick pat-down for weapons, checking pockets and waistband with practiced efficiency. Standard protocol for any arrest, ensuring officer safety before transport. When he reached Marcus's right arm to check the sleeve for concealed items, the fabric rode up past the elbow. The tattoo sat there on the forearm, black ink bold against skin that had seen too much sun during those years deployed overseas. A small shield, the number 17 inside it, and beneath that, 2 words in sharp capitals: "Silent Shield." The officer's hands stopped moving. His breath caught audible enough that Marcus heard it over the sound of Lily crying and Garrett providing his statement to the younger officer. The parking lot seemed to tilt sideways for a moment, all the sounds fading to nothing but the rush of blood in ears and the weight of recognition. But the officer said nothing. He pulled Marcus's sleeve back down and finished the search. Finding nothing more threatening than a wallet containing $43 and a work ID that identified Marcus Cole as employed by Apex Building Services. They loaded him into the back of the patrol car, the cage separating the seats smelling like sweat and disinfectant. Through the window, Marcus watched Brooke holding Lily, the little girl's face pressed against Brooke's shoulder, while her whole body shook with sobs. Helen Crawford stood nearby, trying to explain to the younger officer that the arrest was wrong, that Marcus had been protecting her, but her voice was too quiet, and the officer was too focused on Garrett's dramatic retelling. The patrol car pulled away from the market, leaving Lily behind with a stranger who didn't know that she had nightmares about her mother and needed her stuffed elephant to sleep and wouldn't eat anything green unless you convinced her it was really a magic vegetable. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember how to breathe. 8 years since Operation Silent Shield had ended in betrayal and blood. 3 years since Rachel's car had gone off the road with brake lines that had been cut clean through. And now this arrested in front of his daughter for a crime he didn't commit by a system that would never believe a man in a stained uniform over a man in a leather jacket with the right kind of face. The tattoo burned under his sleeve like a brand, like a death sentence he'd carried for 8 years, waiting for it to finally catch up. Across town, Victoria Lancaster sat in her corner office on the 20th floor of Lancaster Tower, reviewing quarterly security assessments and drinking coffee that cost more than Marcus made in a day. Her assistant buzzed to inform her that Garrett Voss, one of their subcontractors, had been involved in an incident at a market in Brooklyn and had requested company support. Victoria's first instinct was to delegate it. She had 6 department heads who handled contractor relations. But something about the timing nagged at her. Voss had only been on their contractor list for 2 weeks, added through channels she didn't personally approve, and the incident report mentioned an arrest at the scene. She made the call that would change everything. "Tell the police I'll be there within the hour and get me Voss's complete employment file." The Mercedes carried her south through evening traffic, her mind already 3 steps ahead to what this might mean for company liability. What the PR implications could be, whether they needed legal counsel on site. She didn't think about the maintenance worker who'd stood his ground in the parking garage that morning. Didn't connect that moment to this one. Not yet. The police station was exactly what she expected: fluorescent lights that made everyone look vaguely criminal, linoleum floors that had been mopped too many times with industrial cleaner. the smell of burnt coffee and human desperation. Victoria walked through it all with her head high and her heels clicking, drawing stares from officers who weren't used to seeing Armani suits in their precinct. She identified herself to the desk sergeant, explained her purpose, and was directed to a waiting area where she could speak with the victim after he'd finished giving his statement. The sergeant mentioned in passing that the suspect was being processed in the back, would probably be released pending charges once they'd taken his information. Victoria sat on a plastic chair that had probably been uncomfortable in 1987 and was definitely worse now. She checked her phone, answered 3 emails, approved a contract modification that would save the company $40,000 annually. Professional efficiency as armor against the messiness of the world. That's when Marcus Cole walked past the doorway, escorted by a female officer toward the processing area. He didn't look at her, didn't seem to notice her at all. His hands were cuffed in front now instead of behind a small mercy that didn't change the essential indignity. His work uniform was even more rumpled than it had been in the garage, his face drawn with exhaustion that went deeper than one bad day. Victoria's eyes tracked him without conscious decision. Something about the way he held himself straight back despite the circumstances, quiet in a way that suggested discipline rather than defeat. Then he was past the doorway and gone, and she was staring at empty air, wondering why a man being arrested for assault had occupied even 3 seconds of her attention. The door opened and Garrett Voss entered, his arm wrapped in gauze that seemed excessive for the scratch Victoria had glimpsed. He smiled when he saw her relief flooding his features. "CEO Lancaster, thank you so much for coming. I wasn't sure if the company would." Victoria stood, her expression neutral. "Mr. Voss, tell me exactly what happened." He launched into the story with the smooth delivery of someone who'd rehearsed it. The ATM malfunction, his attempt to get help from the elderly woman, the aggressive man who'd attacked him without provocation, the fear for the little girl's safety, the trauma of being assaulted in broad daylight. Victoria listened without interrupting her mind, cataloging details the way she'd been trained to do through years of security work. Voss was hitting all the right emotional notes, painting himself as the concerned citizen, and the other man as dangerous and unpredictable. But something felt off. The story was too perfect, too cleanly constructed. And the way Voss's eyes didn't quite hold hers when he described the actual moment of attack. That was a tell she'd learned to recognize in countless contractor interviews and client meetings. She kept her voice professionally neutral. "Did anyone else witness the attack?" Voss nodded eagerly. "Several people. They were recording on their phones. The police have statements from everyone." Victoria made a note on her phone. "I'll need to review the footage, for liability purposes." Something flickered across Voss's face, too quick to identify, but present enough to confirm her suspicions. He was hiding something. The question was what, and whether it mattered enough to pursue. She thanked him for his cooperation, assured him the company would provide necessary support, and made her way to the desk sergeant with a request that was phrased as casual interest, but carried the weight of a CEO who donated generously to the police union's charity fund. "The incident at Hawthorne Market, is there security footage available for review?" The sergeant made a call, spoke quietly for a moment, then nodded. "Store has 3 cameras. Manager's bringing the files over now. Should be about 20 minutes. Victoria could have left, should have left. Voss's story was consistent. The arrest had been made. Company liability looked minimal, but that wrongness kept nagging at her, that sense of pieces not fitting the way they were supposed to. So she waited. Answered more emails, reviewed a proposal for expanding their cybersecurity division. Checked the time twice and wondered why she was still sitting in a police station at 7:30 on a Thursday evening when she could be home in her penthouse overlooking the East River. Through the window she could see into one of the processing rooms. Marcus Cole sat at a table, no longer handcuffed, his hands resting flat on the surface in front of him. A female officer was taking his statement, but he wasn't talking much, just shaking his head occasionally or offering brief responses. His body language spoke of defeat, but also something else, a stillness that reminded Victoria of her father. Richard Lancaster had been a Marine before he'd built his security empire. He'd moved through the world with that same quality of controlled awareness, like a man who'd seen things that required a different kind of vigilance than civilian life normally demanded. The thought arrived unbidden. What if the wrong man is sitting in that room? Victoria pushed it down. She dealt in facts and evidence, not gut feelings and facial expressions. The facts said Voss had been attacked and Marcus Cole had been arrested based on witness testimony. That was the reality she needed to work with. The store manager arrived with a laptop containing the security footage. Victoria asked to review it personally before any formal company statement, and the desk sergeant, recognizing both her authority and her potential value as a police supporter, arranged for her to use a conference room. The footage started 30 minutes before the incident. Victoria watched at double speed, noting timestamps and camera angles. Standard corner store setup, one camera covering the register, one pointed at the entrance, one monitoring the ATM. At 6:47 p.m., Garrett Voss approached Helen Crawford at the ATM. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but his body language was clearly aggressive. Leaning into her space, gesturing sharply, blocking her path to the parking lot. Helen's posture screamed discomfort. Her shoulders hunched and purse clutched defensively. At 6:52 p.m., Brooke Sullivan stepped outside for what looked like a cigarette break. Voss immediately shifted his attention to her, getting within inches of her face while she backed against the brick wall. At 6:54 p.m., Marcus Cole emerged from inside the store. He said something to the little girl, his daughter presumably, and handed her the grocery bag. His approach to Voss was measured, hands visible, no threatening gestures. He positioned himself between Voss and the two women. The camera's sight line was partially blocked by a support pillar, but Victoria could see enough. Marcus never touched Voss except once briefly when Voss made a sudden movement toward Brooke and Marcus caught his wrist. Not a strike, not aggression, restraint. Not. Then Voss deliberately stepped backward into the energy drink display. His arm sweeping the cans in an arc that looked choreographed rather than accidental. His hand went to his wrist in the universal gesture of injury, and his mouth opened in what was clearly a shout. The people who'd recorded on their phones had started filming right then after the cans fell, after Voss had already created the narrative. They'd captured the aftermath, but not the setup. Victoria watched the footage 3 more times, noting details. The way Voss had positioned himself to block the camera's clear view of the actual interaction. The theatrical quality of his stumble. The scratch on his arm that hadn't existed before he'd backed into the brick wall during his performance. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, something he'd told her when she was 22 and newly in charge of the company. People will lie to you every day, Victoria. The successful ones will do it with a smile and a firm handshake. Learn to see past the performance to the truth underneath. She'd built her career on that advice. Built Lancaster Security into a company that clients trusted because she refused to accept easy answers or convenient narratives. The truth underneath this footage was clear. Garrett Voss had assaulted 2 women, been interrupted by Marcus Cole, and then manufactured an incident to avoid consequences. Victoria closed the laptop and sat in the quiet conference room for a long moment. The smart business move would be to distance the company from Voss, immediately terminate his contract, issue a statement about zero tolerance for dishonesty. Protect the brand. But something about Marcus Cole's face in that processing room kept surfacing in her mind. The exhaustion and defeat, yes, but also that quality of discipline her father had carried. And the little girl who'd been crying in the market footage, her face pressed against Brooke Sullivan's shoulder. While her father was taken away, Victoria made a decision that probably violated every principle of rational business management. She called her personal attorney, Richard Blackwood, and outlined the situation in efficient sentences. Then she instructed him to meet her at the precinct within 30 minutes and to bring paperwork for immediate bail posting if necessary. Blackwood's voice carried skepticism. Victoria, you don't even know this man, getting personally involved in... She cut him off. I'm not asking for advice, Richard. I'm telling you what I need. 30 minutes. 27 minutes later, Blackwood arrived with his briefcase and his resigned expression of a lawyer who'd learned not to argue when Victoria used that particular tone. They approached the desk sergeant together, and Victoria laid out her request with the precision of someone who expected to be taken seriously. Marcus Cole, I want to post bail and I want him released tonight. The sergeant looked between her and Blackwood. Ma'am, he hasn't been formally charged yet. We're still processing. Victoria's smile was cold and professional. Then I'd like to speak with the captain about the security footage from the incident, specifically the 30 minutes before Mr. Voss claims he was attacked. The implied threat hung in the air. She had evidence that contradicted the victim's statement, and she was prepared to make it a problem if they didn't cooperate. The sergeant made a phone call, spoke in low tones, then nodded reluctantly. I'll get the captain. Captain Frank Morrison was 51 years old and looked like he'd spent most of those years eating diner food and managing stress poorly. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his expression suggested this was the last thing he needed at the end of a long shift. But when Victoria introduced herself and mentioned the security footage, something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition that a complication had entered the situation. He invited her and Blackwood into his office, a cramped space that smelled like old coffee and the particular staleness of too many hours spent under fluorescent lights. The desk was covered in folders and reports, the kind of paperwork chaos that Victoria's assistant would have organized within an hour. Morrison leaned back in his chair. CEO Lancaster, I appreciate your concern for your contractor, but this is a police matter. We're handling it according to procedure. Victoria set her phone on his desk, the security footage cued to the relevant timestamp. Captain, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This footage shows Mr. Voss harassing two women before Mr. Cole intervened. I think you'll find the actual sequence of events contradicts the statement you've received. Morrison watched the footage without expression. His eyes tracked the action, noting the same details Victoria had identified: the aggressive approach to Helen Crawford, the cornering of Brooke Sullivan, the deliberate creation of false evidence. When it finished, he sat back and rubbed his eyes. I'll need to review this more carefully, interview the witnesses again. But something in his tone felt off to Victoria, not the relief of a man who'd discovered the truth, but the wariness of someone calculating new angles. His hand moved to his cell phone, checking something, and when he looked back at Victoria, his expression had hardened. The words came out careful and deliberate. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. We'll certainly take it into consideration during our investigation. But Mr. Cole will still need to be processed and held until we can verify everything. Victoria's eyes narrowed. The footage clearly shows. Morrison stood, effectively ending the conversation. The footage shows an altercation that requires thorough investigation. I'm not making any decisions tonight based on security camera footage that could have been tampered with. The accusation was absurd and they both knew it. But Morrison had authority here, and he was using it to shut down a line of inquiry that should have been welcomed. Victoria gathered her phone and stood, her mind already shifting to the next approach. I'll be retaining counsel for Mr. Cole. Any further questioning should go through his attorney. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, though I should mention that Mr. Cole hasn't requested a lawyer, seems content to cooperate with the investigation. Because he doesn't know he needs one, Victoria thought. Because he's probably spent years trying to stay invisible. And this is exactly the kind of attention he's been avoiding. She left Morrison's office with Blackwood trailing behind, already formulating the argument for why getting involved in this case was strategically sound, even if it made no business sense whatsoever. In the hallway, she paused, looking through the window into the processing room where Marcus Cole still sat. His hands flat on the table, his expression carefully blank. For just a moment, their eyes met through the glass. His were brown. She noticed for the first time a warm color that didn't match the coldness of the situation. And in them she saw something that made her chest tighten. Not fear exactly, but a bone-deep weariness that came from carrying weight too long without rest. Then a uniformed officer moved between them and the moment broke. Victoria turned toward the exit, her heels clicking against linoleum, her mind already planning her next move. She didn't see the medical examination that happened 20 minutes later, when the police department's on-call nurse checked Marcus Cole for injuries during standard arrest processing. Didn't see the nurse roll up his right sleeve to check for needle marks or defensive wounds. Didn't see the tattoo that made the nurse's hands stop moving, her breath catching audible in the small examination room. The shield, the number 17, the words "Silent Shield" in capitals that had been inked into skin 8 years ago by a man who died in the operation that ended everything. The nurse stared at it for 5 seconds that stretched into something longer. Then she pulled the sleeve back down without comment and finished her examination. Her face professionally neutral, but her hands not quite steady. In the parking lot, Victoria sat in her Mercedes with the engine running and the heat turned up high. She should go home, should leave this situation to Blackwood and the legal system and the normal processes that handled criminal cases every day in this city. But her father's voice kept echoing. "If you ever meet someone wearing that mark." Victoria remembered they walked through darkness to pull people into light. She'd been 12 years old when he'd shown her the photograph, the black and white image of men in tactical gear with their faces obscured but one arm visible in the frame. That same shield, that same number, those same words. Silent Shield had saved her father's life 20 years ago when the mafia had taken him for ransom. She'd never forgotten the story, how the police had said they couldn't help, how her mother had been preparing to pay millions they didn't have. How a team of specialists had appeared and disappeared like ghosts. And her father had come home with rope burns on his wrists and a gratitude so deep it had changed him. He'd died 10 years later, cancer taking what criminals couldn't. But on his deathbed, he'd made Victoria promise something. "If you ever have the chance to help someone who helped us, you take it, no matter what it costs." Victoria pulled out her phone and called Blackwood. "I need you to file for immediate release. Use whatever precedents you can find. Get Marcus Cole out of that station tonight." Blackwood's sigh carried down the line. "Victoria, it's going to look—" She interrupted again, her voice carrying the steel that made board members nervous. "I don't care how it looks. Get it done." Then she sat in her car in the police station parking lot, watching snow fall against the windshield, and wondered what she was getting herself into. Inside the station, Marcus Cole was being led back to a holding cell for the night. The charges hadn't been filed yet, but Morrison had decided he needed more time to review the evidence, which meant Marcus would spend at least 12 hours in a cage waiting for the system to decide his fate. He thought about Lily, probably still with Brooks Sullivan, or maybe transferred to emergency child services by now. Thought about how terrified she must be, how this would scar her the same way Rachel's death had. 7 years old and already learning that the world was cruel and the people who were supposed to protect you couldn't always do it. The cell was 6x8 concrete and steel, smelling like disinfectant that couldn't quite cover the underlying stench of human misery. Marcus sat on the metal bench and put his head in his hands, feeling the weight of 8 years of running finally catching up. They'd found him. Or maybe they'd always known where he was and were just now deciding to act. Either way, the invisible life was over. The careful routine of work and school pickup and grocery shopping, all of it burned away by a tattoo he'd gotten when he was 22 and stupid and thought he was invincible. He didn't pray. Hadn't prayed since Rachel's funeral, when all the prayers in the world hadn't changed the fact that she was dead. And he was alive, and Lily was alone with only him between her and the people who'd killed her mother. But he closed his eyes and made a promise to whoever might be listening: keep Lily safe. Whatever happens to me, just keep her safe. Victoria spent the night in her office, the city lights spreading below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Blackwood had filed the emergency motions, argued procedural violations, and threatened enough legal action that Morrison finally released Marcus at 4 in the morning with a warning that the investigation remained open. She watched the security feed from the station lobby as Marcus walked out, his movements slow with exhaustion. He stood on the steps for a long moment, breathing the cold air like a man who hadn't expected to taste freedom again. Then he pulled out his cracked phone and made a call that lasted 6 minutes, his face cycling through relief and anguish in equal measure. Lily Victoria assumed, checking that his daughter was safe. Her own phone buzzed with a text from Blackwood. "He's out. This is going to cost you politically if Morrison pushes back." Victoria deleted the message without responding. Politics had never interested her the way results did, and something about the footage she'd reviewed 17 times now, the way Marcus had positioned himself between Garrett and those women, the complete absence of aggression in his body language, told her this was the right move, even if it made no conventional sense. She left the office at dawn, driving through streets where sanitation trucks were the only traffic. The penthouse felt emptier than usual when she entered $28 million of river views and custom furnishings that nobody would ever call home. She showered, changed into fresh clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and made coffee from beans that were roasted in small batches by a company that sourced directly from Colombian farmers. The coffee tasted like excellence and loneliness in equal parts. At 8:30, she called Marcus's number, the one Blackwood had obtained from the arrest paperwork. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough. "Hello." Victoria kept her tone professional. "Mr. Cole, this is Victoria Lancaster. I reviewed the security footage from yesterday. I know what actually happened at that market." Silence stretched for 3 seconds, then, "You're the CEO, the one who came to the station." His voice carried no gratitude, no relief, just wariness that suggested a man who'd learned to be suspicious of help from unexpected sources. Victoria pressed forward. "I need to speak with you. My office, 10 o'clock. There are things we should discuss." More silence. She could hear background noise, a television playing cartoons, a child's voice asking a question. Finally, "I can't leave my daughter right now, and I don't know what you think we have to discuss." The refusal surprised her. People didn't usually say no to Victoria Lancaster, especially when she was offering help they desperately needed. Her response came clipped. "Then I'll come to you. What's your address?" Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear him calculating risks, weighing options. The words came reluctant. "Crown Heights. Give me 20 minutes to make the place presentable." He rattled off an address that Victoria's mental map placed in a neighborhood where Lancaster Security didn't have any contracts, where her Mercedes would stand out like a declaration of class warfare. She went anyway. The building was exactly what she'd expected, pre-war construction that had seen better decades, windows that needed replacing, a front door that didn't quite close properly. The intercom system was broken, so Victoria climbed 3 flights of stairs, her heels echoing in the stairwell. Marcus opened the door before she could knock, like he'd been watching through the peephole. He'd showered and changed into clean jeans and a t-shirt, but the exhaustion still lived in the lines around his eyes. Behind him, the apartment was small but meticulously cleaned furniture arranged with precision that spoke of military discipline or maybe just desperate need for control. Lily sat at the kitchen table, coloring in a book with fierce concentration. She looked up when Victoria entered, her eyes going wide with recognition. "You're the pretty lady from the police station." Victoria's chest tightened unexpectedly. She'd prepared for Marcus's suspicion, his questions, his potential anger. She hadn't prepared for a 7-year-old girl with a rainbow backpack and eyes that held too much knowledge about how bad the world could be. She knelt down to Lily's eye level, her Armani skirt meeting the linoleum floor. "My name is Victoria. I came to talk to your dad about what happened yesterday." Lily's small hand reached out and touched Victoria's sleeve, feeling the fabric with the wonder of someone encountering something genuinely foreign. "Your clothes are really soft, like my stuffed elephant." The observation hit harder than it should have. Victoria owned 17 custom suits, each one costing more than this family probably spent on groceries in 6 months, and this child thought they felt like a stuffed animal. Marcus moved into the kitchen, putting himself physically between Victoria and Lily, an emotion so subtle it might have been unconscious. "Lily, why don't you go color in your room for a bit? The grown-ups need to talk." Lily gathered her crayons with exaggerated care. "Are you going to help Daddy? He didn't do anything bad. That man was being mean to the old lady and Miss Brooke." Victoria met those earnest eyes and felt something crack in the careful compartmentalization she'd built between business Victoria and the woman who still remembered what it felt like to need protecting. "I'm going to do everything I can, sweetheart, I promise." Lily studied her face like she was searching for lies, then nodded with the gravity of someone accepting a binding contract. She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Victoria and Marcus alone in the cramped kitchen that smelled like instant coffee, and the particular emptiness of a home where someone was missing. Marcus didn't offer her a seat. He stood with his arms crossed, his posture defensive. "Why are you here, Ms. Lancaster? You got me out of jail, and I appreciate that. But we both know you didn't do it out of the goodness of your heart." The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, Victoria found herself appreciating the lack of pretense. "You're right. I reviewed the footage because Garrett Voss works for my company and I needed to assess liability. But what I found was attempted assault followed by fraud. Voss manufactured evidence to avoid consequences." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Victoria continued, her voice taking on the edge she used in boardrooms when people were wasting her time. "Captain Morrison knows the truth. I showed him the footage. But he's burying the investigation anyway, which means someone with authority doesn't want this examined too closely." The words landed like she'd hoped they would. Marcus's eyes sharpened, his body language shifting from defensive to alert. "Morrison saw the footage and still kept me locked up." Victoria nodded. "He made a phone call after reviewing it. Then suddenly the evidence needed further verification. That's not standard procedure. That's someone protecting Voss or protecting themselves." Marcus turned away, his hands bracing against the counter. The muscles in his shoulders were tense enough that Victoria could see them through the thin fabric of his t-shirt. When he spoke, his voice came low and dangerous. "You need to walk away from this, Ms. Lancaster. Whatever Morrison is involved in, it's not something you want to touch. Take your company out of it and forget you ever saw that footage." The warning should have made her reconsider, should have triggered the survival instinct that had kept her alive in business dealings where sharks circled constantly. Instead, it confirmed every suspicion that had been building since she'd watched Marcus positioned between Garrett and those women with the calm of someone who'd done it before. She moved around the counter, so he'd have to look at her. "I saw your tattoo, Silent Shield. My father was rescued by that operation 20 years ago when the police said they couldn't help." Marcus went absolutely still. Not the stillness of someone caught off guard, but the frozen awareness of prey that knows a predator is watching. His eyes found hers, and she saw a calculation running behind them. How much did she know? How much could he deny? What was the risk of confirmation versus the risk of lies? The silence stretched until Victoria filled it. "Richard Lancaster. He owned a construction company before he built Lancaster Security. The mafia wanted protection money. He refused. They took him from his car outside our house while my mother and I watched from the window." The memory still carried edges sharp enough to cut. 12 years old and helpless while men in masks dragged her father away. Her mother's screams mixing with the sound of squealing tires. Marcus's face remained carefully blank, but something shifted in his posture, fractional relaxation that suggested she'd said something that made sense of her presence here. Victoria pressed the advantage. 3 days later he came home. Wouldn't tell us how. Wouldn't give us details, but years later, when he was dying from cancer, he showed me a photograph. Men in tactical gear with their faces covered, and one visible tattoo, Silent Shield. She watched Marcus process this, watched him make decisions about trust and risk in the space between heartbeats. Finally, he spoke, and the words came weighted with history. Your father was a good man. He didn't ask questions after, didn't try to find us, didn't make himself a target by getting curious, smart. The past tense landed like confirmation. Victoria's voice softened despite herself. He told me if I ever met someone wearing that mark, I should trust them. That they were heroes who'd given up everything. Marcus laughed, but the sound carried no humor. Heroes? That's generous. We were soldiers who took jobs regular law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't handle. Witness protection when the marshals were compromised. Extraction when hostage negotiation failed. Anything that required people willing to operate outside the system. He moved to the window, looking out at the street below like he was checking for threats. The operation ended 8 years ago. Someone leaked our last mission to the people we were trying to stop. 3 of my team died in the ambush. The survivors scattered, changed names, disappeared. Victoria absorbed this, her mind already connecting dots. And 3 years ago, your wife died in a car accident. Marcus's hands curled into fists against the windowsill. Brake lines cut clean through. Police ruled it mechanical failure. I knew better, but I couldn't prove it without making Lily a target. So I took her and vanished into the kind of life where nobody looks twice. Night shift maintenance, cheap apartment, no friends, no profile. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. Garrett Voss hadn't been random. Morrison's obstruction wasn't incompetence. This was deliberate, coordinated. Someone had found Marcus despite his precautions and was moving to eliminate a loose end. Victoria's business instinct screamed at her to leave, to protect her company and herself from whatever conspiracy had killed Marcus's wife and was now coming for him. But her father's voice echoed louder. You take the chance to help someone who helped us. No matter what it costs. The words came before she could second-guess them. Work with me. Lancaster Security has resources you don't. Surveillance systems, intelligence networks, legal protection. You give me your expertise on this threat. I give you the tools to survive it. Marcus turned from the window, disbelief plain on his face. You don't know what you're offering. These people killed my wife. They'll kill anyone who gets in their way, and they won't care how much money you have or how many lawyers you can afford. Victoria met his eyes, her voice carrying the steel that had built a $650 million company. Mr. Cole, I've spent the last 10 years fighting people who thought I was too young, too female, too soft to run my father's legacy. I've negotiated with drug cartels who wanted our transport security contracts. I've faced down corporate espionage from companies 3 times our size. I'm not afraid of ghosts from your past. The lie tasted bitter but necessary. She was terrified, actually, but terror had never stopped her before. Marcus studied her for a long moment, and Victoria had the uncomfortable sense of being assessed by someone who'd spent years evaluating threats and assets in life-or-death situations. Finally, he shook his head. You have no idea what you're walking into. But he didn't say no. Over the next 3 days, Victoria learned exactly how deep the rabbit hole went. Marcus showed her how to check for surveillance devices, how to spot a tail in traffic, how to recognize the patterns that suggested professional observation versus random chance. They worked from a conference room in Lancaster Tower that Victoria had swept for bugs using equipment from her company's counterintelligence division. The investigation revealed Garrett Voss had been added to their contractor list through channels that bypassed normal vetting. The authorization came from a mid-level manager who'd since taken an unexpected leave of absence. The paper trail was clean enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but sloppy enough that someone looking closely would find the gaps. Victoria was looking very closely. Lily spent those 3 days in Victoria's penthouse under the protection of 2 bodyguards vetted personally by Richard Blackwood. The child had taken to the luxury with the adaptability of someone young enough to find magic in heated floors and a television bigger than she was tall. But she asked about her father every hour, and Victoria made sure Marcus called 3 times daily to prove he was still safe. On the 4th day, Marcus found the tracking devices. 3 of them planted throughout his apartment, 1 in the smoke detector, One inside the back of the television, one molded into the underside of the kitchen table. Professional-grade equipment, the kind that transmitted location data and audio to a receiver within a quarter-mile radius. Marcus stared at the devices laid out on Victoria's desk, his face absolutely expressionless. They've been listening to everything. Every conversation with Lily, every moment I thought we were safe. The violation in his voice made Victoria's hands curl into fists. She'd dealt with corporate espionage before, competitors trying to steal proprietary information. But this felt different, more personal, and infinitely crueler. Marcus's voice dropped to something colder. I'm not going to keep running. Not anymore. Victoria recognized the shift, the moment when fear transformed into something more dangerous. She'd seen it in herself when competitors had tried to destroy her company through sabotage. The decision to fight instead of flee. Her response came carefully measured. Then we use them. Leave the devices in place, feed them false information, make whoever's listening think they know where you'll be. Marcus's eyes sharpened with interest. A trap, Victoria nodded. My head of security can set up a controlled location. We bring them in thinking they have the advantage and we document everything. But we'll need law enforcement cooperation, which means going above Morrison's head. The plan took shape over the next 6 hours. Victoria used connections she'd cultivated over a decade of security work to reach an FBI field agent named Thomas Reeves. 43 years old, decorated career reputation for integrity that had kept him from advancing into the politically compromised upper echelons. Reeves listened to the evidence with the focused attention of someone who'd spent 20 years distinguishing real conspiracies from paranoid delusions. When Victoria finished, he leaned back in his chair. They were meeting in a coffee shop in Midtown neutral territory and studied Marcus with the intensity of an X-ray. Operation Silent Shield was classified. Officially, it never existed. Marcus returned the gaze without flinching. Officially, 3 good people didn't die because someone sold us out for money. Reeves's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I worked peripherally with Silent Shield on 2 operations. You pulled out a prosecutor and his family when a cartel put a hit on them. You extracted an undercover agent when his cover got blown in Chicago. Good work, important work. The validation seemed to surprise Marcus. He'd spent 8 years being invisible, being nobody. Being recognized for who he'd been instead of who he'd become carried visible weight. Reeves continued, his voice dropping lower. The operation ended because someone high up leaked your final mission. We suspected Captain Morrison at the time but couldn't prove it. If he's involved now, there's someone above him pulling strings. Victoria pulled out her tablet, showing him the financial analysis her forensics team had compiled. Morrison's been making deposits that don't match his salary. Small amounts spread across 3 accounts, but it adds up to nearly $200,000 over the past 5 years. Reeves studied the numbers with the appreciation of someone who understood how money told stories. That's not organized crime-level payoff. That's more like somebody keeping him on retainer. Insurance policy money. Marcus spoke quietly. Senator Nathaniel Crane. He was the target of our last mission 8 years ago. We were extracting a witness who had evidence of human trafficking connected to his campaign donors. Crane's been in the Senate for 12 years now, positioning for a presidential run. The name landed like a bomb in the quiet coffee shop. Crane was untouchable, political royalty with enough connections to make investigations disappear and enough money to make problems go away permanently. Reeves's jaw tightened. If Crane's involved, we need ironclad evidence. Audio confession, documented conspiracy, something that can't be explained away as misunderstanding or political attack. Victoria already knew where this was going. We make Garrett Voss think he's in control, give him a target he can't resist, record everything. Marcus shook his head firmly. No. Too dangerous. If something goes wrong. Victoria cut him off, her voice carrying authority that allowed no argument. If something goes wrong, I have lawyers and resources and political connections. You have a 7-year-old daughter and a target on your back. This is the smart play. The logic was sound, but Marcus clearly hated it. He turned to Reeves. You can provide backup, real backup, not just surveillance. Reeves nodded slowly. I can have a tactical team in position, but understand if this goes sideways, we all pay the price. Crane has friends in the bureau. This needs to be absolutely clean. They spent the next hour working out details. Victoria would reach out to Garrett Voss through Lancaster security channels requesting a meeting to discuss his continued contract status. The implication would be clear: she knew something was wrong and wanted to negotiate. Voss would report this to Morrison. Morrison would coordinate with whoever sat above him in the conspiracy. And every word would be recorded by equipment the FBI would provide. The meeting broke up with handshakes that felt like battlefield alliances. Victoria returned to her office. Marcus headed to a safe house Reeves had arranged, and the machinery of the trap began turning. That night, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse with Lily sleeping in the guest room. The child had asked earlier where her father was, and Victoria had lied smoothly about important work that would keep him away for a few days. Lily had accepted this with the resignation of someone who'd learned not to push for answers that would only bring sadness. Victoria checked on her twice, watching the rise and fall of small shoulders under expensive sheets. Something about Lily's presence in this vast empty space made the loneliness more obvious instead of less. The penthouse had never felt like home, but with Lily here it highlighted everything that was missing: warmth, chaos, the particular fullness that came from being needed instead of just respected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thank you for protecting her. I won't forget this." Victoria typed back, "She's safe. Focus on staying alive so you can come get her." Then she deleted the message before sending it and wrote instead, "You're welcome. Get some rest." Professional distance. That was important to maintain. The trap was set for 2 days later, giving Reeves time to position his team and Victoria time to sell the performance. She called Garrett Voss personally, her voice carrying just enough uncertainty to sound convincing. "Mr. Voss, I've reviewed the incident further. There are some discrepancies I'd like to discuss in person. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. The parking structure at the old Bellwether building on 9th Avenue. Voss took the bait smoothly. "Of course, Ms. Lancaster. I'm happy to clarify anything that concerns you." The location was perfect: abandoned office building scheduled for demolition, isolated enough for privacy, but accessible enough not to trigger immediate suspicion. Reeves's team would be in position by 7, hidden in the surrounding buildings with sightlines on every entrance. Victoria wore a wire that looked like an expensive necklace, the microphone sophisticated enough to pick up whispers from 10 feet away. She arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, parking her Mercedes in the spot Reeves had designated for optimal camera angles. Garrett showed up 18 minutes late. A power play that might have worked if Victoria hadn't spent a decade dealing with men who thought tardiness established dominance. She stood beside her car, arms crossed, the picture of impatient authority. Garrett approached with confidence bordering on arrogance. "Ms. Lancaster, sorry to keep you waiting. Traffic was terrible." Victoria didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I know you lied about the incident at Hawthorne Market. The security footage shows you harassing 2 women before Marcus Cole intervened." Watching Garrett's face was like watching a mask being lowered. The friendly contractor disappeared, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Careful what you accuse people of, Ms. Lancaster. Reputations are fragile things." The threat was barely veiled. Victoria felt her pulse quicken but kept her voice level. "I'm not interested in accusations. I'm interested in understanding why you targeted Cole specifically. Why manufacture a confrontation with someone who was clearly just trying to help?" Garrett's smile had nothing to do with warmth. "Maybe Cole isn't as innocent as you think. Maybe there are people who want to make sure he stays quiet about things that happened a long time ago." The admission wasn't quite enough. Victoria pressed, "What things? What could a maintenance worker possibly know that would matter to anyone?" Garrett moved closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her skin crawl. "Operation Silent Shield. Ring any bells? Your new friend used to run with a team that stuck their noses where they didn't belong, made enemies in very high places. Those enemies have long memories." Victoria's hand tightened on her phone in her pocket, the signal for Reeves's team to close in. But before she could trigger it, headlights swept across the parking structure. Captain Morrison stepped out of an unmarked sedan, his service weapon visible on his hip. His face was hard as concrete when he approached CEO Lancaster. "I think you should leave now. This doesn't concern you." Victoria held her ground even as her survival instinct screamed retreat. "Captain, this is a private meeting. You have no jurisdiction here." Morrison's laugh was bitter. "You really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Do you, smart woman, like you built an empire and you're going to throw it all away for some maintenance worker with a savior complex?" The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Morrison wasn't here to protect Garrett. He was here to clean up loose ends, and Victoria had just made herself one of those ends. Her voice came steadier than she felt. "If something happens to me, everything I know goes to the FBI. Complete documentation, audio recordings, financial analysis showing your offshore accounts." Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon. "Bluffs don't work when you're the only one who knows where the evidence is." Then Marcus Cole stepped out of the shadows near the stairwell, his hands empty but his posture radiating controlled violence. "Actually, she's not the only one." Morrison spun his weapon, clearing the holster. Garrett moved toward Victoria, reaching for her arm, and Victoria triggered the signal in her pocket, praying Reeves's team was as good as promised. The next 90 seconds happened in fragments. Marcus rushed Morrison, closing the distance before the captain could fire. Garrett grabbed Victoria's arm hard enough to bruise, yanking her toward the sedan. She drove her heel down on his instep with all her weight, technique learned in the self-defense classes she'd required for all female employees. Garrett's grip loosened just enough. Victoria twisted free and ran toward Marcus, who had Morrison on the ground with the captain's weapon kicked clear. Tactical lights flooded the parking structure as FBI agents poured in from 3 directions. Their weapons trained and voices sharp with commands. Morrison went still under Marcus's weight. Garrett tried to run but made it exactly 4 steps before agents tackled him face first into the concrete. The parking structure filled with echoing shouts and the crackle of radio traffic. Reeves appeared at Victoria's side, his face grim. "You okay?" She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she had to clasp them together to hide it. Marcus stood slowly, letting agents secure Morrison with zip ties. His eyes found Victoria across the parking structure, checking for injury with an intensity that made her chest tighten. She nodded again to show she was intact. The evidence collection took 4 hours. Morrison's phone revealed text messages to a number registered to an aide in Senator Crane's office. Garrett, once in custody and facing federal conspiracy charges, started talking within 20 minutes, implicating Morrison, revealing the payment structure, admitting that eliminating Marcus had been ordered from above to prevent any exposure of Crane's involvement in the original Silent Shield betrayal. By midnight, the case was no longer Victoria's problem. It belonged to federal prosecutors who specialized in political corruption, and they moved with the speed of people who knew that evidence against senators had a way of disappearing if you didn't act immediately. Victoria and Marcus stood in the parking structure after the agents had left the space, still lit by portable floods that made everything look stark and surreal. Marcus spoke first. "You shouldn't have put yourself at risk like that. If Reeves's team had been 30 seconds slower..." Victoria cut him off, surprised by the anger in her own voice. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't do. I made a choice to help you, and I'd make it again." The admission surprised them both. Marcus studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time, looking past the CEO armor to whatever vulnerability she'd just exposed. His voice softened. "Why, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Victoria thought about her father's photograph, about the men who'd risked everything to bring him home. Thought about Lily asking if Victoria would help her daddy. Thought about 10 years of building walls so high that nobody could reach her and how exhausting that had become. The words came quiet but certain. "Because my whole life people have only cared about what I could do for them. My money, my company, my connections, but you didn't want anything from me. You told me to walk away to stay safe. Nobody's done that in longer than I can remember. Marcus's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read, not pity, thankfully. Maybe understanding. Maybe the recognition of someone else who'd learned to expect nothing good from the world. He took a step closer and Victoria's breath caught despite herself. For one electric moment she thought he might kiss her, and she wasn't sure if she wanted him to or if that would complicate everything beyond repair. Instead, he held out his hand. Partners then, until we see this through to the end. Victoria shook at his palm, warm and calloused against her soft skin. The handshake lasted 3 seconds longer than professional, both of them holding on like the contact meant something they couldn't quite articulate yet. Then Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Reeves Cranes in custody. Move fast. The endgame was beginning. Senator Nathaniel Crane's Georgetown mansion occupied 2 acres of prime Washington real estate, the kind of address that spoke of generations of inherited power and the absolute certainty that consequences were for other people. FBI agents arrived at 3 in the morning with warrants authorized by a federal judge, who'd been woken up and shown evidence compelling enough to overcome political hesitation. Crane was in his study when they breached the front door, sitting at a mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather. He looked up from the laptop he'd been frantically wiping and smiled like a man who'd played this game before. Gentlemen, I assume you have identification and proper authorization for this invasion of my privacy. Agent Reeves held up the warrant with one hand, while tactical agents secured the perimeter. Senator Crane, we have credible evidence linking you to conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and corruption charges spanning 8 years. You need to step away from the computer. Crane's lawyer arrived within 12 minutes, an expensive suit named Gerald Pritchard, who specialized in making federal cases disappear through procedural challenges and political pressure. He swept into the study like he owned the building, already threatening lawsuits and congressional oversight hearings. But Reeves had spent 20 years building cases that couldn't be dismantled by lawyers with better connections. The forensics team found the safe hidden behind a painting of Crane's great-grandfather, combination lock fireproof, containing documents that should have been destroyed years ago. Inside sat a USB drive from 8 years prior, labeled only with a date that matched Operation Silent Shield's final mission. The drive held transaction records, communication logs, and a spreadsheet detailing payments to Morrison and 3 other officers in exchange for leaking classified operational details to Crane's associates. Crane had kept the evidence as insurance leverage to ensure Morrison's continued cooperation. Now it became the rope that would hang him. The arrest made national news by 6 in the morning. Victoria watched it from her office, the television showing Crane being perp-walked in handcuffs, while reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. The senator's carefully constructed image, champion of family values, tough on crime, presidential aspirant, crumbled in the harsh glare of camera flashes. Marcus stood beside her, his presence solid and grounding in a way she was still getting used to. His voice carried satisfaction that 8 years of running hadn't dulled. He kept the evidence, arrogant enough to think he'd never be caught. Victoria understood that particular flavor of hubris. She'd seen it in competitors who'd underestimated her, in board members who'd assumed a young woman couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of security contracting. Crane had believed himself untouchable the same way those men had believed her incapable. They'd all been wrong. Her phone buzzed with a call from Richard Blackwood, his voice carrying exhausted triumph. The DA's office just announced they're dropping all charges against Marcus. Full exoneration. Morrison's confession corroborated everything, and Garrett Voss is cooperating in exchange for reduced sentencing. Victoria felt tension she hadn't acknowledged she was carrying finally release from her shoulders. What about compensation? Marcus lost his wife, spent 3 years in hiding, was falsely arrested. Blackwood interrupted with the tone of someone delivering good news. Federal government is offering $5 million in settlement for the death of his wife and the wrongful termination of Operation Silent Shield. State is adding another $1 million for the false arrest. It's not enough for what he went through, but it's substantial. $6 million. Enough to rebuild a life, to give Lily opportunities Marcus couldn't have dreamed of providing on a maintenance worker's salary. Enough to stop running. Victoria glanced at Marcus, whose face had gone carefully neutral the way it did when emotions threatened to overwhelm his control. She ended the call and turned to him fully. "You heard?" His nod came slow. "I don't want their money. Can't bring Rachel back. Can't give Lily her mother." The bitterness was understandable, but Victoria had spent too long building financial security to let him refuse out of principle. "No, it can't, but it can give Lily college tuition, safety, a future where she doesn't have to worry about making rent or whether there's food in the refrigerator. Rachel would want that for her." The use of his dead wife's name could have been overstepping, but Marcus's expression softened instead of hardening. He turned away, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that glittered with the particular indifference cities showed to individual suffering. "Rachel wanted Lily to have a mother. That's what she asked for before she died. Make sure our daughter doesn't grow up alone." The confession landed between them like something fragile. Victoria's chest tightened with the weight of it, the trust implied in sharing that particular pain. Her response came careful. "Lily won't be alone. She has you. And she has people who care about her." Marcus met her eyes with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Does she? Or is this just obligation until the case is closed and you can go back to your life?" The question cut deeper than he probably intended. Victoria had asked herself the same thing 3 times in the past week, lying awake in her empty penthouse while Lily slept down the hall. Was this temporary compassion born from proximity to tragedy? Or was it something more fundamental, shifting in how she understood what mattered? The words came before she could calculate their impact. "I don't know what this is, Marcus. But I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is check on Lily. I know that I've rearranged my entire schedule to make sure she feels safe. I know that the thought of her going back to that empty apartment in Crown Heights makes me want to burn the whole building down and find her somewhere better." Marcus stared at her like she'd spoken a language he was still learning to comprehend. The silence stretched until Victoria couldn't bear it. "I'm not trying to replace Rachel. I could never do that. But maybe Lily doesn't need a replacement. Maybe she just needs someone who shows up." The distance between them closed in 3 steps. Marcus raised his hand, like he might touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and let it fall. His voice came rough with emotion he wasn't quite hiding. "You've already done more for us than anyone has in 3 years. I don't know how to thank you for that." Victoria's breath caught at how close he was standing, near enough that she could smell the soap he used and see the exact color of brown in his eyes. "Don't thank me. Just let me keep showing up." The moment hung suspended, heavy with possibility and the particular tension of 2 people who'd been isolated too long suddenly finding connection. Then Marcus's phone shattered it with a ringtone that made him step back immediately. Lily's voice came through the speaker, bright with the resilience of children who adapted faster than adults gave them credit for. "Daddy, Mrs. Henderson made me pancakes with chocolate chips. When are you coming home?" Mrs. Henderson was the retired schoolteacher Victoria had hired to stay with Lily during the day, someone with references so pristine she'd made Blackwood's background investigators look lazy by comparison. Marcus's face transformed when he heard his daughter, all the hardness melting into something that made Victoria's chest ache. His response carried warmth that chased away the bleakness. "That sounds delicious, baby. I'll be there this afternoon. We have some things to talk about, good things." Lily's squeal of delight carried through the phone. "Is Victoria coming too? I made her a picture." Marcus glanced at Victoria, question in his eyes. She nodded without hesitation. "Tell her I wouldn't miss it." They took Victoria's Mercedes because Marcus's Honda had finally died 2 days prior, the transmission giving out, with the timing of something that had been holding on through sheer stubbornness. The drive to the penthouse took 20 minutes through midday traffic, neither of them speaking much, but the silence comfortable instead of awkward. Lily met them at the door with the drawing clutched in both hands. Her face split with a smile that reminded Victoria painfully of every photograph she'd seen of Rachel. The little girl launched herself at Marcus with enough force to make him grunt, wrapping her arms around his waist and refusing to let go for a solid minute. Then she turned to Victoria and held out the drawing with the solemnity of someone presenting a diplomatic gift. The picture showed 3 stick figures in front of a house, one tall with brown hair, one smaller with yellow hair, and one tall with black hair wearing what appeared to be a triangle dress. Lily's voice carried pride. "That's you, me, and Daddy. We're a family." The simplicity of it hit Victoria harder than complicated legal arguments or boardroom negotiations ever had. She knelt down to Lily's level, holding the drawing like it was worth more than the Picasso hanging in her office. "This is beautiful, Lily. Can I keep it?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I made it special for you. Mrs. Henderson said to use the good crayons." Victoria looked up to find Marcus watching them with an expression that made her feel simultaneously expied and valued in ways she couldn't articulate. She stood still, holding the drawing. "I'll put it on my refrigerator, right where I can see it every day." The afternoon dissolved into something Victoria had never experienced: domesticity without performance. They ate sandwiches that Mrs. Henderson had prepared before leaving, Lily chattering about the books she'd read and the educational videos Mrs. Henderson had shown her about ocean animals. Marcus listened with the attention of someone who'd learned that these moments of normalcy were precious and fleeting. Victoria found herself memorizing details: the way Lily kicked her feet under the table when she got excited, how Marcus cut the crusts off her sandwich without being asked, because she'd never liked them. The sound of laughter that filled the space between marble counters and floor-to-ceiling windows, making the penthouse feel less like a showpiece and more like somewhere people actually lived. After lunch, Lily pulled Victoria into the guest room that had become her temporary space and showed off her collection of stuffed animals with the intensity of a museum curator. Each one had a name and backstory. Elephant was brave but scared of thunder. Bunny liked carrots, but only the orange ones. Bear was the oldest and wisest and helped everyone solve problems. Lily held up a worn stuffed dog with one ear missing. "This is Patches. Mommy gave him to me before she went to heaven. He's special." Victoria's throat tightened at the casual way Lily referenced her mother's death, like it was just another fact about the world rather than a tragedy that had reshaped her entire existence. "He looks very special. I bet he has important jobs." Lily nodded seriously. "He guards my bed at night. Makes sure bad dreams don't come." The weight of that responsibility, a stuffed animal standing between a 7-year-old and the nightmares born. From watching your father arrested and learning your mother wasn't coming back, made Victoria want to wrap this child in protections money couldn't buy. She settled for sitting on the floor while Lily arranged her stuffed animals in elaborate scenarios, half listening to the detailed plots while her mind worked through logistics she hadn't let herself consider until now. Marcus and Lily couldn't go back to that apartment in Crown Heights. Even with Crane arrested and Morrison facing federal charges, there were loose ends and associates who might decide revenge was worth the risk. They needed somewhere secure, somewhere that felt like home instead of a fortress. An idea began forming, one that made business sense even if the emotional motivation was harder to justify. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep watching a nature documentary about dolphins, Victoria found Marcus on the penthouse balcony staring at the river. The city spread below them like a promise of anonymity and possibility in equal measure. She joined him at the railing, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I have a proposal. Business proposition." Marcus glanced at her with amusement. "Those are your favorite kind, aren't they?" Victoria ignored the observation because it was accurate. "Lancaster Security needs someone with tactical expertise to head our threat assessment division. Someone who understands how criminals think, how to identify vulnerabilities, how to extract people from dangerous situations." Marcus's expression shifted to wariness. I fix heating systems, haven't done tactical work in 8 years. Victoria pressed forward because she'd learned that sometimes you had to overwhelm objections with momentum. You've been doing tactical work every day for 3 years, staying alive, protecting Lily, evading people who wanted you dead. That's more relevant than any corporate security training. She pulled out her phone and showed him a salary range that made his eyes widen. 200,000 base plus performance bonuses. Full benefits for you and Lily. Company housing allowance because Crown Heights isn't secure enough. Marcus stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. Victoria, I can't. This is too much. You're offering this because you feel guilty or responsible or... She cut him off with the edge in her voice that appeared when people assumed her decisions were based on emotion rather than calculation. I'm offering this because you're uniquely qualified and I need someone I can trust absolutely. The fact that I also care about your daughter's well-being is secondary to the business reality that you're the best person for this position. The lie was transparent enough that they both knew it, but Marcus seemed to appreciate the framework that let him accept without feeling like charity. What about Lily? I can't work security hours with a 7-year-old. Victoria had anticipated this. Lancaster Security has on-site childcare for employees' children, or we could arrange private care, or... She paused, the next words feeling more significant than they should. She could stay with me when you're working late. The penthouse has 3 bedrooms. The offer hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them had discussed. Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Why are you doing this? Really? Victoria met his eyes and decided the truth was less complicated than continued deflection. Because the first time I saw Lily, she asked me to promise I'd protect her daddy. Because when I wake up and hear her laughing in the next room, it's the best sound I've heard in 10 years. Because I've spent a decade building a company and a fortune, and I've never felt as useful as I do making sure that child has everything she needs. The confession surprised them both with its rawness. Marcus's hand found hers on the railing, his calloused fingers threading through hers in a gesture that felt both tentative and inevitable. His voice came quiet. I'm not good at this, letting people in, trusting that they won't leave or get hurt or use what they know against me. Victoria squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of contact she'd been denying herself for longer than was healthy. I'm not good at it either. I've built walls so high that nobody's gotten close in longer than I want to admit. But maybe we don't have to be good at it. Maybe we just have to try. Marcus studied her face like he was looking for cracks in the armor, weaknesses he could exploit or protect against. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy some internal calculation because he nodded slowly. Okay, I'll take the job, but I pay my own rent. I'm not living off your charity. Victoria's smile carried triumph. The housing allowance is part of the compensation package. You'd be insulting the company by refusing it. His laugh was soft but genuine. You're relentless. Her response came before she could reconsider the wisdom of it. Only about things that matter. The kiss happened without either of them planning it. One moment they were standing close, hands clasped, something electric building in the air between them. The next moment Marcus was leaning down and Victoria was rising up, and their mouths met with the tentative exploration of two people who'd forgotten how to want something this uncomplicated. The kiss lasted maybe 5 seconds before they both pulled back, breathing harder than the brief contact warranted. Marcus looked stunned, like he'd acted on instinct and was now processing the implications. Victoria felt heat spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the October evening. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Marcus's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. I'm not looking for something temporary, and I won't put Lily through getting attached to someone who's going to leave when things get complicated. The boundary was fair, necessary even. Victoria had seen too many of her father's business associates cycle through relationships like they were quarterly earnings reports. She'd sworn she'd never be that person, never use people and discard them when they stopped being convenient. Her voice came steady despite the way her heart was hammering. "I don't do anything halfway, Marcus. Ask anyone who's ever negotiated with me. When I commit to something, I see it through." The promise hung in the night air, witnessed by the Manhattan skyline and the particular silence that came from two people taking a risk they both knew could end badly. Marcus kissed her again, slower this time, with the deliberate intention of someone who'd decided to trust despite every survival instinct screaming caution. Victoria leaned into it, her hands finding the solid warmth of his shoulders, letting herself feel wanted in ways that had nothing to do with her bank account or her company's quarterly performance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing ragged, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Lily's going to have opinions about this." Victoria laughed, the sound surprising herself with how genuine it felt. "Lily drew us as a family 3 hours ago. I think she's ahead of us." The next 6 weeks blurred together in a cascade of legal proceedings, media attention, and the slow reconstruction of a life that had been fractured for too long. Senator Crane's trial dominated news cycles, his lawyers mounting increasingly desperate defenses that crumbled under the weight of Morrison's testimony and the physical evidence. Morrison himself took a plea deal, 20 years federal prison in exchange for complete cooperation. He gave up names, described the payment structure, detailed how Crane had used his political connections to bury investigations into Operation Silent Shield's betrayal. The corruption reached deeper than anyone had anticipated, touching police departments in 3 states and implicating 2 other senators who resigned before formal charges could be filed. Garrett Voss received 8 years for conspiracy and assault, a sentence that felt insufficient, but was better than the nothing he'd have gotten if Victoria hadn't pushed the investigation forward. Through it all, Marcus started his new position at Lancaster Security with the focused intensity of someone proving he belonged rather than accepting charity. His first week, he identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in their client protection protocols. His second week, he redesigned the threat assessment matrix their analysts used, incorporating techniques from his Silent Shield training. By week 4, Victoria's department heads were asking if they could poach him for their own divisions. She denied every request with the satisfaction of someone who'd made an excellent hire. Lily enrolled in a private school 3 blocks from Lancaster Tower. Small class sizes and teachers who actually cared about individual students rather than just processing children through standardized testing. She made friends with a girl named Sophie who also loved dolphins and had strong opinions about which stuffed animals had the best personalities. Marcus picked her up every day at 3:30, walking the 3 blocks to grab ice cream from a shop that knew their order by heart. Victoria joined them twice a week when her schedule allowed, learning to navigate conversations about second-grade drama and the complex social dynamics of playground politics. The media eventually moved on to newer scandals, Crane's trial becoming background noise as the news cycle demanded fresh outrage. But for Marcus and Lily and Victoria, the attention had never been about headlines. It had been about building something stable enough to withstand the next crisis. 2 months after Crane's arrest, Victoria made an offer on a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. 4 bedrooms, backyard, walking distance to Lily's school, and a reasonable commute to Lancaster Tower. The real estate agent had looked confused when Victoria specified that the master bedroom needed to be large enough for a king bed, but also that 2 of the other bedrooms should be equally sized. Marcus saw the house on a Saturday afternoon, walking through rooms that had crown molding and hardwood floors and windows that actually let in natural light. He stood in the kitchen that was big enough to eat in and looked at Victoria with suspicion. "This is too much." Victoria leaned against the granite counter she'd already mentally replaced with something warmer. "The penthouse is too sterile for a child. Lily needs a yard. You need space that doesn't feel like you're living in a hotel." Lily had already disappeared into the backyard, her voice drifting through the open door as she narrated an elaborate game involving the overgrown garden and her stuffed animals, who apparently needed exploring territory. Marcus moved closer to Victoria, his voice dropping low. "We haven't talked about what this is, what we're doing. You buying a house feels like a conversation we should have first." Victoria had been avoiding that conversation for exactly this reason. Once you named something, you had to commit to definitions and expectations and all the ways relationships could fail. What do you want it to be? The deflection was cowardly, but Marcus didn't let her get away with it. I want to know if you're buying a house for us or buying a house where Lily and I can live while you maintain your penthouse and we all pretend this is something it's not. The bluntness stung because it was fair. Victoria had built her career on decisive action, but her personal life had always been a masterclass in avoiding commitment. I'm buying a house where we can build something that feels like home. All of us. Together. The words felt both enormous and insufficient. Marcus studied her face like he was searching for the catch, the moment where she'd clarify that she meant something less absolute. Instead, Victoria pushed forward before she could reconsider. I'm in love with you. I've been falling since you stood up to me in that parking garage and told me I couldn't buy your skill. And I love Lily like she was my own daughter, which is terrifying because I've never loved anyone enough to hurt this badly at the thought of losing them. The confession came out less elegant than her usual presentations, words tumbling over each other with the urgency of something too long contained. Marcus's expression shifted through surprise, understanding, and something that looked like relief. His hands framed her face with gentle pressure. I've loved you since you showed up at my apartment when you could have walked away, when you risked your company and your safety because you believed I was worth protecting. Nobody's ever fought for me like that. The kiss was different this time, not tentative or testing, but certain. Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself fall into the particular madness of wanting someone this much. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for several minutes the empty house and the future and all the complicated logistics disappeared into the simple reality of two people choosing each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus's smile carried warmth that chased away every doubt. So we're doing this. Really doing this. Victoria nodded, her usual composure thoroughly destroyed. We're doing this. The house. The future, all of it. Lily's voice drifted in from the backyard. Daddy, Victoria. Come see the garden. Bear thinks we should plant flowers. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying pure joy that Victoria wanted to memorize. He took her hand and pulled her toward the door. Come on. Apparently Bear has opinions about landscaping. The next 4 months were a blur of house renovations, furniture shopping, and the million small negotiations that came with 3 people learning to live as a family. Lily had opinions about everything. Her bedroom should be painted purple. The kitchen needed a cookie jar shaped like a castle. The backyard definitely required a swing set, even though she was getting too old for one. Victoria discovered she had surprisingly strong feelings about thread count and whether the living room couch should be leather or fabric. Marcus proved to have actual talent for carpentry, building custom bookshelves for Lily's room and a window seat that became her favorite reading spot. They moved in on a Saturday in February, snow falling softly while movers carried boxes and furniture that represented 3 separate lives, merging into something new. Mrs. Henderson came by with a casserole and advice about proper seasoning of the cast-iron skillet Victoria had inherited from her grandmother. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her purple bedroom surrounded by boxes of stuffed animals, Marcus and Victoria sat in their bedroom with the king-size bed and the antique dresser Marcus had insisted on keeping from his old apartment because Rachel had loved it. Victoria hadn't felt threatened by the gesture. Rachel was part of who Marcus was, part of Lily's history. Erasing that felt cruel rather than protective. Marcus pulled Victoria against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. Thank you for this, for all of it. Victoria's response came quiet. Thank you for trusting me enough to try. They fell asleep that way, wrapped together, the house settling around them with the particular sounds of a place becoming home. 3 months later, on a Sunday afternoon when spring was turning Brooklyn green, Marcus took Victoria and Lily to Prospect Park for what he claimed was just a regular picnic. The basket he'd packed seemed unnecessarily elaborate for sandwiches, and Lily kept giggling at nothing in particular, but Victoria played along because she'd learned to appreciate mystery. They found a spot near the lake, spreading the blanket while Lily ran ahead to feed ducks with bread that Marcus had specifically instructed her not to use yet. When Victoria turned back from watching her, Marcus was down on one knee holding a ring box. Her heart stopped for a solid 3 seconds. His voice carried emotion he wasn't trying to hide anymore. "I spent 8 years convinced I'd never get to want anything again. That safety meant living small and quiet and alone. You taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, that letting people in is worth the risk." Lily had circled back, standing beside her father with a smile so wide it threatened to split her face. "Ask her daddy," Marcus laughed, his eyes never leaving Victoria's. "Victoria Lancaster, will you marry us?" The plural made Victoria's eyes sting with tears she rarely let herself shed. Not marry me, but marry us, acknowledging that this was about building a family, not just joining two people. The word came choked but certain yes. Lily shrieked and launched herself at Victoria hard enough to knock them both over. Marcus caught them before they hit the ground, wrapping both his girls in his arms while strangers in the park applauded, and Lily announced to everyone within earshot that she was getting a mommy. The ring was simple white gold with a single diamond, elegant without being ostentatious. Marcus slipped it on her finger with hands that trembled slightly. "It was Rachel's. She told me before she died to make sure whoever I gave it to loved Lily as much as she did. I think she'd approve." Victoria looked at the ring that carried the blessing of a woman she'd never met but owed everything to. Then at the man who'd taught her what courage actually looked like, then at the little girl who'd asked her to protect her daddy and ended up saving them all. Her voice came thick with emotion. "I think she would too." The wedding happened 6 weeks later, small ceremony in the brownstones' backyard with 50 guests who actually mattered. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd picked herself that was covered in sparkles and definitely not traditional. She took the job seriously, scattering rose petals with the concentration of someone performing surgery. Victoria wore ivory silk that her mother had cried over, simple and elegant in ways that felt right for a second chance neither of them had expected. Marcus wore a suit that actually fit, looking like someone who'd finally stopped running long enough to build something permanent. Agent Reeves attended, bringing his wife and a gift card to a restaurant Victoria could have bought outright. Richard Blackwood gave a toast that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measures. Mrs. Henderson caught the bouquet despite being 62 and having no interest in dating. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marcus kissed Victoria like they were the only two people in the world. Lily cheered and hugged them both, inserting herself between them in a sandwich that became their new normal. That night, after guests had left and Lily had finally succumbed to exhaustion despite insisting she wasn't tired, Victoria and Marcus stood in their backyard under stars you could almost see despite the city lights. Marcus's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "No regrets." Victoria leaned back into his warmth, the ring on her finger catching starlight. "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." His laugh rumbled against her back. "If we'd met sooner, I would have been too broken to see what you offered, and you would have been too focused on building your empire to slow down for a maintenance worker." The observation carried truth they both recognized. Timing mattered as much as circumstances. They'd found each other when they were both finally ready to risk the vulnerability that love demanded. Victoria turned in his arms so they were face to face. "Promise me something." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Anything." Her voice came quiet but intense. "Promise me we'll keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when we want to run. Promise me we'll fight for this." Understanding flickered in his eyes. She wasn't talking about their marriage, but about the lifetime of walls she'd built and the years he'd spent invisible, about the deeply ingrained habits that would try to resurface under stress. His hands cupped her face with gentle certainty. "I promise. Every day for the rest of our lives, we show up." The kiss sealed it like a vow more binding than the legal paperwork they'd signed that afternoon. 6 months into married life, Victoria sat in her office reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant buzzed with an unexpected visitor. Lily appeared in the doorway, rainbow backpack still on, face flushed from running. Victoria's heart jumped immediately to crisis mode. "Baby, what's wrong? Where's your father?" Lily bounced on her toes, too excited to stand still. "Daddy's downstairs, but I had to tell you first, Sophie's mom is having a baby, and Sophie says babies come when two people love each other really much. And I was thinking—" She paused for dramatic effect that would have made Marcus proud. "Maybe we should get a baby too. I could be a big sister. I'd be really good at it." Victoria's breath caught somewhere between laughter and the overwhelming realization that this conversation required more thought than she'd given it. That's something Daddy and I would need to talk about." Lily's face fell slightly. "You don't want a baby?" The question hit harder than any boardroom negotiation. Victoria had spent her entire adult life building a company, deliberately avoiding the traditional markers of success her mother had expected: marriage, children, suburban domesticity. She'd convinced herself she didn't want those things because wanting them meant admitting she was lonely. But looking at Lily's hopeful face, thinking about Marcus and the life they were building, the answer surprised her with its clarity. "I didn't know I wanted one until you asked. But yeah, baby, I think I do." Lily squealed and hugged Victoria's waist with enough force to make her office chair roll backward. "Can we tell Daddy now, please?" They found Marcus in the lobby, leaning against a support column, looking like someone trying to blend into architecture. His face, when he saw them both, lit with the particular warmth Victoria would never get tired of inspiring. Lily ran ahead and whispered something that made his eyebrows shoot up. His gaze found Victoria's across the marble expanse, question and hope mixing in his expression. Victoria nodded, her smile answering before words could. That night, after Lily had been convinced to go to sleep with promises that yes, they'd discuss baby siblings seriously, Victoria and Marcus lay in bed talking about futures they'd both given up on. Marcus's hand rested on her stomach like he could will a child into existence through touch alone. "You're sure this isn't just because Lily asked?" Victoria covered his hand with hers. "I'm terrified. I have no idea how to be a mother, but I've learned that the things worth having are usually the ones that scare us most." His kiss was soft against her temple. "You're already a mother. You have been since the day you promised Lily you'd protect me and actually meant it." The words settled something Victoria hadn't realized needed settling. She'd spent so long thinking love was something that happened to other people, something she'd traded for sex and security. Turned out she'd just been waiting for the right people to show her what it actually looked like. 1 year and 4 months after the wedding, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Rachel Margaret Cole Lancaster. 8 pounds 3 ounces, with her father's brown eyes and enough lung capacity to make the nurses wince. Marcus cried when he held her, overwhelmed by the particular grace of getting to name his second daughter after the wife he'd lost. Lily appointed herself official big sister and took the job with the seriousness of someone given vital responsibility. Victoria recovered from labor in the private room Marcus had insisted they didn't need, but she'd booked anyway, watching her husband and her daughters and feeling the staggering weight of having everything she'd convinced herself she could live without. 2 years after that, they added a son, Daniel Richard, named for both grandmothers who'd shaped them. Lily was 9 by then, convinced she was basically a third parent and offering advice on everything from diaper changing to which stuffed animals were appropriate for a boy. The brownstone filled with noise and chaos and the particular fullness that came from people who chose each other, building something that would outlast them all. On their 5th anniversary, Victoria and Marcus stood in the backyard watching Lily push Rachel on the swing, while Daniel napped in Marcus's arms. The garden they'd planted together had grown wild and beautiful, exactly like Lily had predicted it would. Marcus's voice carried quiet contentment. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd walked away that night at the police station?" Victoria leaned into his side, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "Every day, And every day I'm grateful I didn't. Her career had evolved. She'd stepped back from day-to-day operations, appointed a CEO who shared her vision but had better temperament for the endless meetings. She still sat on the board, still made strategic decisions, but her priorities had shifted in ways her younger self wouldn't have recognized. Success looked different now. It looked like Rachel's first steps and Lily's perfect spelling test and Daniel's laugh when Marcus made funny faces. It looked like Sunday dinners that lasted hours and bedtime stories that required 3 books minimum, and the particular exhaustion of loving people this much. Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for showing up, for keeping your promise." Victoria thought about the maintenance worker who'd stood up to her in a parking garage, the little girl who'd asked her to protect her daddy, the life they'd built from the wreckage of everything they'd lost. The words came certain, "Thank you for being worth showing up for," Lily called from across the yard, wanting them to watch Rachel's new trick. Daniel stirred and made soft baby noises that would probably become full crying in about 30 seconds. The neighbor's dog barked at something invisible. Life continued with all its messy, imperfect glory. Victoria looked at the ring on her finger. Rachel's ring, blessed by a woman who'd loved enough to want Marcus happy even after she was gone. Looked at the man who'd taught her that courage meant letting people see you scared. Looked at the children who'd made her understand why people talked about love like it was worth dying for. She'd spent 32 years building walls and fortunes and carefully controlled distance from anything that could hurt her. Spent 10 years being the best at something that ultimately meant nothing compared to this. The sound of her daughter laughing, the weight of her son in her husband's arms, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The snow started falling soft and steady, covering their Brooklyn garden in white. Inside the house waited warm and bright and full of the evidence that they'd been there. Shoes by the door, drawings on the refrigerator. The controlled chaos of a family that had learned to show up for each other even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Marcus took her hand, and they walked toward their life together, footprints marking the snow proof that they'd been here, and chosen each other and built something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth everything.